After my great-grandfather's death, my grandmother got a job at I told you about the job at the drugstore. After she got off work, she had to take a bus to come home. And the last stop on the bus line was 3.5 miles from their house. So my great-grandmother would force the boys to walk the 3.5 miles to meet my grandmother at the bus stop and then walk her home because she didn't think it was safe enough for her to walk alone every night, late at night, 3.5 miles. So that worked out to be obviously a 7-mile walk most nights for the boys. But there were times when my grandmother would meet a boy at the drugstore during the day and decide to go out on a date after work instead. So on those nights, her brothers were forced to sit at the bus stop and wait for hours until she finally showed up. Because she couldn't pick up a cell phone and tell them she was going out, right? And telling me about that, her youngest brother said, basically we had 2 ways of ending every day of our lives. We would either walk home half mad because we had to walk 7 miles every day, or we'd walk home all mad because Christine never showed up. My grandma, as you might expect, was kind of the second mom to the rest of the kids because she was the oldest. She naturally took on a lot of responsibility for them. She was able to finish high school and was one of only 2 of the 8 kids who did. She met my grandfather while playing with his sisters. They began to date, and then when he went off to Germany for the war, she stayed behind as a part of the Rosie the Riveter generation. She worked for TVA when all the men left. My grandfather was a medic in the war and was at Normandy the day after we stormed the beaches. The day after he returned to Alabama from the war, the day he returned to Alabama from the war, his dad came over to my grandmother's house and said, you should be here and greet him when he comes home. So they fooled around and wasted too much time. They got back over to the house and my grandfather had already gotten home and gone immediately to bed. Probably can't blame him for that, right? So she got to greet him the next morning after spending the night at their house. It was very quickly after that, sort of fate was sealed for them that he had survived and made it home. They married very quickly after that. It was the time of the boom of the car industry in Detroit, and that's what ultimately took the 2 of them from Alabama up to Detroit and to begin working in GM, where he retired several years ago. My grandmother's youngest sister that I was mentioning before told me that the only time she ever hated my grandfather was when he took her big sister, or her second mom, away from her. This woman, my grandmother, had such humble beginnings. So many of those stories I had never heard. I had no idea. I knew that they had it rough when her dad died, but I had no idea what kind of poverty they had really lived in, and how much they had sacrificed to do that. The boys never got an education, all these things that had to happen because of that. She had such humble beginnings. She lost her father. She ended up losing 2 of her siblings at young ages. 2 of them died from different causes. She had 4 very different kids of her own. They sort of spanned the gamut in the way that they think and live. She had 3 grandchildren, of which I was the only boy, and then 4 great-grandchildren. She almost lost one of her sons in Vietnam due to a roadside kind of bomb. Kind of lost that son after he came back from Vietnam because then he got involved in drugs. She raised, I didn't even know this, she raised another child for a woman who, the kid was basically orphaned. And so for about 3 or 4 years, she raised a young infant for a family that had just come into the church randomly with nobody to care for the baby. She wasn't perfect, but she was a person who loved people very well. When she asked my aunt about 6 or 7 years ago if I was gay, my aunt responded to her, "You should probably ask Wes about that." And my aunt said, "But does it make any difference to you if he is?" And my grandmother's response to that was no. She never had a chance to ask me about that because a stroke came along shortly after that and stole away her ability to speak. But she knew. She had met Kevin, and I think she knew who Kevin was. At any number of points along the way, when I look at my grandmother's life and the challenges that were there, she could have decided that the world was a terrible place, filled with tragedy and loss, weighed down with despair, but she didn't. I was really frustrated at her funeral that was the picture of the world that the other minister that sort of did the funeral with me gave. I sort of provided the eulogy and let him do the preachery parts and let myself be there to be at a funeral. And he talked about this, how it was so good that she was gone and all these sorts of things, but it had that sort of ugly backside with, well, it's good that she's gone too because this world is full of evil and sin and we just need to get out of here. And I was sitting there thinking, actually, I thought she made it a better place. I thought it was better because of her, and that there were really good parts of being in this world with her. And I think the more that I look at her life, the more I realize that that's true, but it's true because she made a choice. She made a choice to find the harmony in the mess and make that mess beautiful. Harmony, I think, can come in many different forms. When we use that word, we often think immediately of music and of all the different ways that harmonies in music can create beautiful sounds, or if it's in a scary movie, really haunting sounds. But harmony can be more than that. In life, it can be found in going to Washington, D.C. with a whole bunch of other people to remember Martin Luther King and his I Have a Dream speech, which so many people did this week. Less dramatically, it can be found in the life of a simple homemaker who rose out of dire poverty in the 1930s. Where are you building harmony in your life? In the series, I've been trusting you to do that work as we go through week to week, thinking about, journaling about, praying about what it is that you're building, and asking yourself if you're building the right things, if you're prioritizing the right things and the right people in your life. What are you building, and what kind of harmony are you building? Does the harmony sound like worship, or does it sound like there are notes that seem to threaten something is coming, like some scary movie on the verge of something jumping out? You don't have to have an I have a dream speech to have a dream. You don't have to have an I have a dream speech to build harmony. I believe that we have one simple life, and that one life offers us one big opportunity to live in harmony or to battle against any number of foes that are of our own creation. Enemies that we make up only in our minds and in our perceptions of others in our world. We get to choose how we view the world that we live in. We can choose to see the despair, or we can choose to build harmony with the mess. Sometimes I think that can be a frustrating part of my job when I see someone who's going through a rough time who gets so focused on the rough part of it that they lose all ability to begin to see how they could take that and view it differently as an opportunity to do something better, to build something better. I urge you to take Peter's advice from our scripture reading today, that all of you live in harmony, be sympathetic, lovers of your fellow believers, compassionate, and modest in your opinion of yourselves. Let there be no purpose in friendship save the deepening of spirit. Let's deepen our friendships. Let's live in harmony together. Build a simple and beautiful life. It doesn't have to end up in a history book. And if my grandmother's life is any example to us, then you can, in fact, change lives in mightier ways than you can imagine through a very simple life led well.